What up, everyone? This is Mr. Lord Dark Professor Dark Joker with this week's video. This week will be another A Song of Ice and Fire video, and I'm going over to a theory I have about the prince that was promised. A prophecy that's, been a thing since the first book. We don't know exactly what all it is because there's a lot of mysteries, especially in regards to, the first long night and then the potential, the second long night, and then, everything with that, and who's the prince? Is it a prince? Is it a princess? Because you have some translation stuff. How does it affect, the seasons and all that? And when will, and with the comment, who is the prince? So yeah, with all that being said, on with the video. First, I'm going to explain, what's known about the actual prophecy with the prince that was promised. So we know the prince is supposed to be heralded by a red comet, which we've seen in the books. The second book really gets into the comet, and then the prince was to be born of salt and smoke, with the smoke possibly referring to Summerhall, and the salt referring to crying tears. And then the prince is supposed to help lead humanity in the war for the dawn against the others. And will hopefully save the world from the long night that never ends. That's what the servants of the priestesses of R'hllor they promote a lot. Then the Song of Ice and Fire, is heavily associated with prophecy. I believe it's supposed to be the actual text with the prophecy because you have, Aegon the Conqueror's dream. If we're assuming Aegon had the dream, then, everything with that. So, it's supposed to give a clue as to how the books are supposed to end. I'm going to explain Azor Ahai. So, Azor Ahai, he was known by other names: Hyrcune the Hero, Yentar, Nefarion, and Eldrick Shadow Chaser. And to create Lightbringer, you know the burning sword, he killed his wife Nissa Nissa after multiple failed attempts to forge it. He had to shove the sword into his wife, killing her, in order to turn the sword into the flaming sword, in order to fight against the darkness, believed to be the long night. The last hero. So this was a legendary figure who recruited the children of the forest to help humanity against the others, and he possibly fought in the battle for the dawn with the original Night's Watch members. So it's possibly that the last hero could be the original Lord Commander, and then, or at least was heavily involved in their founding, where he was the actual Lord Commander. Who knows? And he's heavily associated with the Azor Ahai story. So there's a possibility that they're the same character. Now I'm going to get into some of the possible identities for the prince that was promised. So first up, Rhaegar Targaryen. Now, obviously, he is not one. I'm just bringing up because within the books themselves, he was thought of by some people as a potential possibility because he thought himself to be one because he was born at Summerhall, and then the tragedy of Summerhall happened the day he was born. Then I guess he sees possibly saw the prophecy. He believes something, but he wanted to help fulfill the prophecy to prepare for what's to come. Since Targaryen has to be on the throne to unite Westeros, and then of course, years later, he believed his son Aegon Targaryen was the prince that was promised. And of course, with both of them officially being seen as dead, neither of them are seen by a lot of people as potential possibilities. Now, Aegon might be alive because we know stuff with Griff possibly being the Aegon. Now, it's not known. Some people think he's not. That Varys is lying to have a male heir to take the throne, since Daenerys is a woman, and the way A Song of Ice and Fire works is that a lot of people do not want female heirs. They don't want them. They want to sell with Aegon being a male. Varys believes people will fall in line easier, and that could bring peace to the realm. Which that is something I think Varys would totally do. He would totally lie about someone's parentage in order to keep peace. Because he wanted, I think he wanted like Joffrey's parentage kept a secret to keep peace in the realm. But since that's not officially known, if that young Griff is the real Aegon or not, I'm still keeping it as a possibility. Now, another possibility is Tyrion Lannister because the scene in the show with like him being with the dragons and them not attacking him. So that leads to a possibility, and that's a theory. This theory has been around for a few years of Tyrion being the illegitimate son of Aerys II Targaryen, because it's believed that one of the reasons Tywin hates Tyrion is because Aerys is Tyrion's father and not Tywin. And no, I mean one of the other reasons the fact that Tyrion's a dwarf and you know his Tyrion's mother died in childbirth, all that. Tywin just doesn't like Tyrion. But with him possibly having Targaryen blood, that leads to the possibility that the that he could be a prince who was promised, and that with his ties to like he became good friends with with Jon Snow, and he's shown sympathy for Bran Stark. Then he's technically the official husband for Sansa Stark, and like basically all the people he's interacted with and made deals with in the books. He could unite a lot of people. Like, and then, yeah. And so, of course, another strong possibility Stannis Baratheon, since he has a sword, he calls Lightbreather. And being a Baratheon, there's a possibility he has, Targaryen blood in him. Because the founder of House Baratheon is believed by some to be the illegitimate half brother of Aegon the Conqueror. Which, I think if we get an Aegon the Conqueror TV show, which we should, get on it, HBO. I think that's one of the rumors that would be proven to be true. Is that the founder of House Baratheon is the half brother of Aegon, the Conqueror. And so at least possibly that Stannis could ride a dragon. That I mean, not everyone who has Targaryen blood is able to ride dragons. Like I don't know exactly how. Like I think it's like there's like a percentage thing of how much Targaryen blood you actually need in order to, I guess, be able to ride a dragon. Because like that, which based on how what we see in House of the Dragon with some of those who've had Targaryen descent, they're still not accepted as dragon riders. Like it's, I guess, the weird percentage of what you need, how much Targaryen like dragon rider blood you need, which is why a lot of the dragon lords on Valyria basically kept things very close in the family when it comes to procreating, because it seems like in order to keep the dragon lord blood pure so that they can still ride dragons. And so if Stannis has enough dragon rider blood inside of him, he could potentially ride dragon. Now, of course, one of the really strong contenders is Daenerys Targaryen. Since there's possibly that the translation for like the prophecy may not necessarily, like it could be like the prince, it could be a prince or a princess. Like it's not confirmed. And she has three dragons. You have the whole thing about the dragon needs three heads. Now, of course, Rhaegar thought it meant three Targaryens. There weren't any dragons when Rhaegar was alive. So who knows if that's true, or if it has to be, or if three dragons fulfills that requirement. Which in that case, Daenerys is a strong contender, and with her obviously probably leading a lot of her forces to Westeros to take King's Landing. And then, of course, one of the other really strong contenders is Jon Snow, because so in the TV show we have the plot point where he's revealed to be Aegon Targaryen, the true born son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark. Now, we're not. Now, if that plot point is true, like if him being the trueborn son of those two characters, which I think it is, I think the plot point of Rhaegar, like either annulling his marriage with Elia or just doing polygamy. I mean, he's not the first. He wouldn't be the first Targaryen to do polygamy. You know, even though like that's kind of looked down upon by some people, even within the Targaryens. But if he annulled his marriage to Elia and married Lyanna, and Jon being created from that, regardless of if Aegon is Jon's true name, because it's possibly not, because so Fagon didn't exist in the show. They gave a lot of his stuff to Daenerys. So at least possibly that maybe they merged some of Fagon stuff with Jon Snow, and basically they just called him Aegon because of that. Now it's possibly like he could just be Jon Targaryen as a way to have a name from the first name being from the north, since I believe like Jon is a so like there has been a king of the north named Jon Stark. This is before like Aegon's conquest. Like there, Jon is a name within the Stark. So you have a first name being from the Starks, the last name being from the Targaryens, and that could tie into the whole A Song of Ice and Fire thing with Stark blood and Targaryen blood. And with Jon Snow, also potentially with in the show we see he gets exiled after he kills Daenerys. So, and if he's a prince that was promised, his story could then mirror Paul Atreides in Dune, because Paul Atreides is exiled in Dune Messiah. Spoiler for the second book and possibly the third movie if they're actually faithful to the book, which they're probably not going to be. So Paul Atreides like goes into exile in the second book, and Jon Snow does. So you have a Messiah-like figure who is then seen negatively by a lot of the people going into exile. That could do a lot of like what kind of story George R. R. Martin like is what kind of story George R. R. Martin is telling with like the whole Messiah story, and then because Dune I believe was a major influence on Song of Ice and Fire, and then basically like a lot of that. So that makes Jon a very strong contender with Quisek Haderach and then Prince was Promised having being very similar in how it actually goes about in reality. Because it doesn't go as well as like the Quisek Haderach doesn't go as well for the Bene Gesserit as they hope. So another strong possibility being Bran Stark because in the show he becomes king at the end, and the books he's probably going to become king. That he's probably going to sit on the Iron Throne. And as far as Song of Ice and Fire stuff goes, with him being the three-eyed raven, you have him being trained by Brynden Rivers, one of the many illegitimate children of Aegon IV Targaryen. So with the someone with Targaryen blood, training the Stark, you have a Song of Ice and Fire in that aspect, and if Brynden Rivers, passes on some of his power to Bran, or if he wargs himself into Bran, like permanently, like controlling him, like permanently, where basically Bran's like a vessel for Brynden, and you have the whole Blood Raven stuff, like with Brynden possibly being a vessel for R'hllor, with the Ravens. So it was all lost stuff with the Ravens. Doing this, that bit's connected to like my Gods theory, which I did previously. And so Bran is a contender for the prince that was promised. Now, another one, probably a little more out there, Euron Greyjoy because you had the vision of him having like a tentacle face with the Shadow Woman beside him. You get it's a possibility that the prince who was promised, yeah, is actually evil. I mean, no, which don't be surprised. Basically, you have an evil prince. So you have Euron like taking the throne, and basically everyone has to fight back against the prince who was promised. With Euron, with all his stuff, like there's probably a lot of weird magic stuff going on with that. Like, and so, and who knows what all's going on with that character. And then, so, like, Euron is it could be a potential contender. Like, because it wouldn't be surprising if you said, oh yeah, let's just make one of the most evil guys in all of Song of Ice and Fire into the prince who was promised. And basically, they have to just, like, go against the prophecy or something. Like, they have the choice between going with the prophecy or going against it if Euron ends up being the prince. And, and also with Dune, you had, the prophecy of the Kwisatz Haderach was kind of well, it's just like it was the Bene Gesserit manipulated a lot of things. Like the prophecy was kind of more artificial, wasn't very natural. So there was a lot of manipulations and what they were doing with bloodlines and stuff. So Euron could be the prince that was promised, but a very bad prince who everyone will have to just they'll have to kill or something. Now I'm gonna get into the my theories in regarding to you know how the war for the Dawn goes, who's the prince who was promised, the dragon heads, and all that, Song of Ice and Fire. So for the war for the Dawn, how that's gonna start is with Arya Stark. So Arya, as I mentioned in a previous video about my theory regarding the gods, I think Arya will become a vessel for the Great Other, or she would know it as the many-faced god due to her time with the Faceless Men. Why this happens, she will sell her soul to the god in exchange for help in killing people who are on her list, and also in exchange for sparing the North from the Great Other's wrath. Now, this whole thing will turn her into the Night Queen, in a sense. Now, why aren't they actually use that term? I don't know. Probably not. That may just be an unofficial term. And basically, she will lead the others to King's Landing as a vessel for the Great Other. So, like, the others will just skip the North and just go straight to King's Landing because when with the phrase basically wiping each other out in a civil war, it's not gonna be that hard to get through the twins. you know, and then all the stuff with probably some of Daenerys' people attacking. It's yeah, it's not gonna take much for and with the war going on, there's gonna be a lot of bodies that could be added as whites. Then also, so Jon Snow is going to be brought back as a Fire White. This will happen due to Catelyn Stark transferring her abilities as a Fire White to Jon, which would be very poetic, given how Catelyn had treated Jon throughout, when she was alive and when Jon was alive. And then Jon, while he's in the afterlife, before he's resurrected, he meets Ned Stark. And, basically Ned fulfills his promise to tell him about his brother the next time they meet. And he tells him that tells Jon that he is the true-born son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark. Then Rhaegar and Lyanna will appear, and Rhaegar will explain all stuff with the Song of Ice and Fire, with the Prince who was promised prophecy, and will reveal that Jon is the Prince who was promised, as like the union of a marriage between a Stark and Targaryen. He has with both bloodlines involved. Basically, he is the Prince who was promised. So kind of like if you in Dune where you had the Atreides and the Harkonnens, like the union between those bloodlines was what was going to be the final connection for the Kwisatz Haderach. And so, since Dune's a very big influence on Song of Ice and Fire, makes some sense. With like two important bloodlines being the connection needed to create the prince. And when everything's said and done, Stannis Baratheon, Daenerys Targaryen, Euron Greyjoy, and quote quote Aegon Targaryen, if he is Aegon, who knows, they're all going to die as pretenders to the prophecy. Now, as far as when they die, Stannis, he could die during the Battle of King's Landing with like Daenerys, around where Daenerys and Cersei die. Or he could die before the battle against the Boltons. I think that's more likely. And Daenerys, I'll get into her death in a little bit, but she'll die at King's Landing. I'll just say that. Then Euron, I think he dies at King's Landing. I think like he's killed during the battle, like basically, like I, I could see like Jon Snow being the one to kill him. Basically, saying he's a heretic, you know, for trying to forge a new empire of the dawn, to try and name himself like a new god of the earth, and basically will die like the last one. And then basically die like the actual like the all the like the emperors that went against the two big gods, like will die like them. And then the Aegon Targaryen, who we know as Griff, like he like basically whether or not he's Aegon, it probably be revealed whether or not he is Aegon, but while he dies, I think he's killed by Daenerys. I think basically there's gonna be a marriage arranged between Daenerys and Aegon to unite their claims to the throne. They're Targaryens. It's not out of the realm of possibility. And basically they'll get the king. They'll take King's Landing. I don't think it's gonna be with much resistance. Like I think, like I'm not gonna go into how I think it's gonna go down. I'll get into that in a later video. But basically, they're gonna take King's Landing. Aegon be welcomed as the here like basically the new hero, like the heroic like conqueror, the heroic like liberator of the Lannister from the rule of the Lannisters and Euron Greyjoy. And Daenerys is gonna get pissed off, and she will kill Aegon and burn King's Landing. Yeah, and so and kill a bunch of people. And so now so as I said, Jon Snow's the Prince was promised, and which will make him one of the three dragon heads. Now, who are the other two? I think they're Bran Stark and Tyrion Lannister. Why I think it's those two and not like Daenerys or Aegon or Stannis, I think it has to do with the Song of Ice and Fire, referring to a potential union between Targaryens and Starks. So Jon being the true-born son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, and regards to Bran, he was trained by Brynden Rivers on how to be a green seer, and when Brynden dies, Bran succeeds him as the Three-Eyed Raven. And Brynden, of course, being one of Aegon the Fourth's many illegitimate children. Yeah, in regards to Tyrion, well, he is the illegitimate. I think the theory about him being the illegitimate son of Aerys II is true. I think it's true, so he does have Targaryen blood. And also, he married Sansa Stark. And when Sansa becomes Queen of the North, I think Tyrion becomes her king consort. And so basically, the three dragon heads have connections to both the Starks and the Targaryens. And as far as Lightbringer goes, how it's created, so Jon and Daenerys, I think, do fall for each other. Now, their relationship, I think, is a lot more twisted than it is in the show. So both are going to be very brutal in how they do conquering. Like, they're going to be very brutal. And Jon will not necessarily be as against Daenerys when it comes to how she kills people compared to how he is in the show. But he will kill her to create Lightbringer. Basically, how, like, so Azor Ahai had to create the original Lightbringer by stabbing his wife, Nissa Nissa, with a sword. So basically, Jon, when he's about to become the king consort, with Aegon being dead, he'll have to kill Daenerys to create Lightbringer, and he'll basically breaking his oath against her, and also being a kinslayer, and he'll use it to kill Arya and the Great Other, absorbing the Great Other's powers. And Jon just gonna be like, while he's dead, while he was like dead and saw the afterlife, and he's probably very effective, being very. It's probably gonna hurt. It's still gonna hurt him. He's still gonna be affected by him having to kill Daenerys, him having to kill Arya, and basically he'll absorb the Great Other's powers when he does all this. And what this will do is it gives R'hllor control over the Great Other's powers, because Lightbringer with the flame, it's the blessing of R'hllor. So basically, that sacrifice was needed to. So it being the flaming sword, the glowing sword, where it's to have the blessing of R'hllor, and that sacrifice was what was needed. And Stannis will fail to do that when he sacrifices his daughter. Like once he sacrifices his daughter, he will think he has a Lightbringer, but when he dies, he'll learn right before he dies that it's not the true Lightbringer, and he will die. And like knowing that he's not the prince that was promised. And so Jon, with the true Lightbringer, will absorb the Great Other's powers. And since he's a Fire White, he's like a servant of R'hllor. So basically, he becomes like the Night King in a sense. Like, I don't know if they would use the term. They might as like a nickname, like Jon the Night King. And I guess since he killed Daenerys, and some people potentially see him now as a fake prince who was promised, who broke. They may see him as the promise breaker or the oath breaker or whatever. Basically, and as a kinslayer. So there's a lot. So people are going to see Jon very badly. Like basically, like he did dishonorable, was seen as dishonorable things in order to destroy the Great Other. But stuff that I guess, due to how things work in the world, had to be done. Since and this will lead to the Pact of Ice and Fire. So basically, Bran Stark is going to become king. The that's going to happen, and it's going to be so. Tyrion in the novels basically had comments about how illegitimate children, dwarves, and cripples are looked upon poorly by people. And so now you would have a cripple sitting on the Iron Throne, or whatever exists now if the Iron Throne's destroyed. You have you have like someone who's an illiterate child and a dwarf being the king consort of the North, and basically having helped unite the Seven Kingdoms. And then you have the Prince who was promised being previously seen as a illegitimate child, but also now being a kinslayer, an oathbreaker. So it's like very dark things had to happen to save the world. And that so Jon will be exiled, and which would be a happy ending for him because he was very happy in the far north. And this will also mirror Paul Atreides, because in Doom Messiah, Paul goes into exile at the end of Doom Messiah, and Basically, John's exile, since George R. R. Martin was very influenced by the Dune novels, John's exile will be influenced by Paul's exile, so that is why John will be exiled. From a writing standpoint, from a story standpoint, it's because of all the stuff he did to defeat the Great Other. And John, when he goes to the wall, because he's allowed to take the block again instead of just being executed. I mean, he's a Firelight, so it'd be kind of hard for him to be executed permanently. So John will go beyond the wall and become the new king of beyond the wall. And then the North will be independent of Bran's rule. So Sansa will be the queen of the North, Tyrion will be her king consort, and basically the North and the Night's Watch will act as buffers between the far North and the Six Kingdoms. And Bran, being the Three-Eyed Raven, will start the Three-Eyed Raven dynasty where Three-Eyed Raven always rules. Basically, his successor as king will also be his successor as the Three-Eyed Raven. And also, he would serve as like a vessel for R'hllor, and that will like basically, you know, as a vessel for R'hllor, like basically like the god himself, like is directly ruling over a lot. So he's like a direct connection to R'hllor, and R'hllor has control over the Great Other's powers in the far north. So he has control over life and death. And so that this will lead to the great summer, the eternal summer, after a really bad winter. And so basically you have a god who basically has complete control. Not and this ain't a god that's like I guess the real life god in the real world who is but all good and all powerful. This is a god who's R'hllor is a god who is all powerful, but he's not all good. So it's basically what the board is like basically this story is like a pick your switch, like where it's the Great Other that won or R'hllor that won. You would have basically you you're picking between two pricks, and then John being a basically a servant of R'hllor will have the power of the Great Other, will serve as like his herald of death. Like from the far north will control death as like an eternal king beyond the wall. And so like the North will just separate the two, prevent, any potential conflict between like, you know, basically like yeah, it'll just be so you have the Starks basically be on top. You have one the Stark siblings, if you count John as a Stark sibling, technically he is one because he was raised up by Ned in a sense. And so you have John in the far north, Sansa in the north, Bran in the Six Kingdoms, and that's how it goes. So yeah, this is how I think like the whole Prince of Promise prophecy. People are not going to be happy with how it was fulfilled. Much like the Bene Gesserit weren't happy in the Dune novels about how Paul fulfilled it. So like that, this is how like the whole I guess Twilight Zone like be careful what you wish for type thing. Like not necessarily a happy ending. Probably would not be a happy. It'd be a meaningful ending. It wouldn't be happy. But yeah, this is how I think it's gonna go down. And that's it. Do y'all like this video? Do you agree with it? Do you disagree? Do you have other ideas as to who the prince who was promised was? Do you do you have different ideas of how the basic story of the whole conflict involving the prince will go? And who ends up on the Iron Throne? Like how Lightbringer is made, and yeah, where you agree, where you disagree, where you like this video, dislike this video, you know, whatever. You can put all that in the comments, and you can like, share, subscribe, all that stuff, and look forward to the next video.